Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for this next episode of What to Do About Wireless Radiation. So I am Cece Doucette. I'm the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and I have a kind gentleman from New Zealand who has offered to co-host with me tonight. Daniel Vasku was with me last week as well when we did our World Electromagnetic Sensitivity Day, or EMR Syndrome Day. And Daniel told his experience with wireless technology. And so I'm going to add Daniel to the spotlight here, and he's going to spend a couple of minutes sharing with us how he came to know about this wireless issue and where that has left him today. So Daniel, welcome. Thank you for being with
Hi.
us from halfway across the world. And please share with us how you learned about wireless radiation and its health impacts.
Yeah, that happened around 2012. I've been up till then, and I still am an extremely happy tech guy. I love using technology for creativity and um, always enjoy pushing it to the envelope. And that summer in 2012, I started to get quite sick, and I couldn't really figure out what was going on till I went on a road trip with all our gadgets, and we visited a friend, and he was actually electrosensitive and explained me some things about it, and that's when I started to put things together. It took me another 3 years maybe of self-denial, of thinking, well, it's probably in my head. Well, it really can't be, but it's very obvious when it happens. When I use the phone too much or Wi-Fi too much, I get these headaches. And as I progressed through this, I got worse over the years, and I had to become really I had to become really careful with it because the pains just got so bad that at some point I was working at I was setting up a business, and I was being exposed way more than I used to be before that, because I was engaging a lot with customers. And I started to get really big migraines, and to to recover from those, it just took longer and longer. It was a day, it was 2 days, and before I knew it, I was being in a migraine haze for like a whole week. And I had to change my life, and I went completely rural, joined a community, and led a simple life. And I found that that still is the best thing that I can do. So I have been developing lots of ways of being able to cope with it. I haven't found a way to actually, let's say, heal or get better. But if I am here on this new community land where I'm now, I am completely fine. I'm actually great because I have managed to keep all the RF to an absolute zero. With the Safe and Sound Pro, I measure 000, and I don't use AC power. Absolutely not, because that really makes me sick too. And everything is shielded. And when I go into town, oh, where do I have it? Oh, I usually put on a helmet and a whole suit and a whole shielding gizmo to go into town. And that is how, for the last couple of years, I have been able to, yeah, survive and thrive in this environment. As I see that things are getting worse out there, I'm trying more and more to create shareable principles and ways of working. And what I'm discovering with technology, like how I live with DC power, is something that I'm sharing with people, and more people are coming to me to also learn how they can, yeah, how they can have a good life while not being so exposed, because it's not in our heads. It is something that is affecting us, even the insects, the mammals, the plants. It is affecting all life. And I feel it's very important for me to stay on this path and make use of my sensitivity, because in one way I could be very sad, like, oh, I can't go there and there and there, but I'm actually embracing it, that I'm the instrument that is most useful in this circumstance to be able to figure out how to make a way forward. So at this point in my life, I'm living here in this new startup community land, where we are inviting people in to come and develop a life that is holistically healthy. So that means that we have living spaces, or we aim to build living spaces that don't have any off-gassing, low on plastics, a good way of eating whole foods, organic foods, and most importantly, to have an EMF-free space. So this is a safe white zone where people are aware of it, and share ways of making sure that we can live an unexposed life as much as possible. That way, I think we can start to create a bubble of delight where people maybe feel attracted to and will come into, and we have something to share to the wide outer world with all its wireless technology. So
Oh,
that's enough about me, and
Daniel, that
I'd
is
like to give it
fantastic.
back.
And I'm so sorry for the suffering that you've had to go through to get to this point. It's remarkable that you are at 0.000 on the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And we're going to
Yeah.
be doing a demonstration with that as part of our program today. So thank you so much for joining us. And we were laughing before we started recording. I'm sitting here wearing as little as I can because we're in a heat wave in Massachusetts right now. And he's wearing like a sweater and a hoodie and a coat. So we are literally worlds apart here, but we're on literally the same wavelength. And we'll talk about those frequencies today. So Daniel, thank you so much. And Daniel's going to be our Wizard of Oz behind the curtain there. He'll be admitting people and monitoring the chat. We welcome you to drop information into the chat or to connect with one another, but we like to keep the chat relatively quiet so it's not a distraction to those listening to the program. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm going to begin a presentation that will go about an hour and a half. And when that is done, Daniel will let us know if there's any questions we can field from the chat. And then if there's still time before our 2-hour program is up, we can open it up for live questions as well. So Daniel, again, thank you so much for joining us from New Zealand. And on my final slide, I have a link to Daniel's webpage if you want to go look and connect with him and see a bit more about what he's been doing over in New Zealand. So thank you, thank you. All right. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to do a screen share and bring up my slides. I think this is the right one. Daniel, can you give me a nod if you can see that?
Yes.
Great. So we will send these slides out to everybody tomorrow who registered, along with the recording. And just a little bit about myself and how I fell down the rabbit hole. That MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And when my kids were in school, I had no idea about this. All I knew is that we kept hearing about the 21st century classroom. Our school budgets were cut to the bone year after year. And so I revived our local education foundation, and I ran. I ran many campaigns to get wireless infrastructure in, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smart boards and minis and Apple TV, which we were hearing was what our children would need to succeed in the world. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped me off that there are biological effects to all of this wireless technology. And it was book group, so I just kind of made a mental note of it. But then not long after that, I saw that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases because regular doctors haven't been trained to recognize illnesses that are coming from somewhere in the environment. And the American Academy of Environmental Medicine put out a position statement back in 2012 warning our school superintendents not to allow wireless into our schools. So at that point, I went, whoa, what is this? And so I thought, is there any science? And I went, you don't even have to look very far. You just need to know to look. And I was astounded to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed published studies from all over the world showing very extensive harm. And we're going to review the science with you today. So it was not an easy conversation back in 2014 to have with my schools because we were in the throes of everybody needs to have all this technology because ed tech got in to our schools and made us think that this was the only way our kids are going to thrive. Now we see a lot of pushback happening. A lot of schools are starting to implement bell-to-bell cell phone and personal device bans because this whole ed tech push has really backfired and it has not brought the outcomes that we were promised. So it's a good time to have this conversation about also speaking up about the wireless radiation. So we became the first in the United States a decade ago to even have this little sign, best practices for mobile devices, hanging in all of our classrooms. Turn these devices off when we're not actually using them. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed, and never put one of these devices on your body. And we'll show you the legal fine print today that explains why that's really important. So I didn't know it at the time, but we became the first in the United States to even have a little sign like this with precautionary baby steps. And then I met with my state senator, who is now our Senate president, Karen Spilka, and I showed her the science. I showed her our little sign. I measured the radiation coming from her device and her district director's device. Both devices went right off the charts, and I'm going to give you a demonstration of that today too. And she's looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows. This is like drugs or alcohol or tobacco or pornography or gambling. Adults will make their choices around these addictive behaviors, but aren't we morally obliged to protect our children? So Senator Spilka put me in touch with an attorney in her office, and together we crafted a very simple bill that would bring the right minds together at the state level to investigate this and then decide what to do. Well, we've had these bills in Massachusetts for 10 years now, and we've been congratulated for getting them out of committee from time to time, but then they just get assigned to the next committee, and then the session ends before they take any meaningful action. But in 7 months' time, we got a bill passed into law in the state of New Hampshire, and they did a groundbreaking commission report after investigating for a year that documents all of the conflicts of interest with our federal agencies and the telecom and the wireless industries, and making 15 recommendations for what to do about this. And every time we try to enact those recommendations, the industry comes in and just trounces us. So a lot of good things are happening, not quickly enough to protect your children and mine today. But that's why we do these free public education webinars to give you enough information to hopefully feel empowered to start taking some baby steps towards safety for yourself. And then look around you and say, wow, we really need to look at this on the community level too. So we have excellent resources today that did not exist a decade ago. And so we're going to share all that with you today in this presentation. And then one of the world's leading scientists on this is Dr. Devra Davis, and she founded the Environmental Health Trust. And somebody over in Europe figured out what the wireless issue was and realized that we can't fix it until we know about it. So we've got to get the education out front. And Brett West and his wife Lynn started developing a course, and they reached out to Dr. Devra Davis and said, may we please ask your permission to reference your website at the Environmental Health Trust in this course that we're building out? And she said, absolutely. And you probably want to speak to this woman, Cece Doucette in Massachusetts, because she's making some inroads with her schools and her legislature. And then she also said, you should probably also talk to Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the leading scientists in Finland. So Brett and Lynn and Mikko and I, our calendars collided at just the right time, and we spent about 6 months building out this little course that can be, I kid you not, completed online in about an hour, where you could train an entire school, you can train an entire municipality or a family, or you could train an office. So we have off-the-shelf training available today at Safer Screen Time. We do charge a nominal fee of about $15 to help us cover our overhead expenses, but we will work with schools or corporations on bulk pricing. We have a Robin Hood model where if a corporation does the employee training for their staff, then they could nominate a school and we could make sure that the school gets the licensing to also get this important training. So lots of great resources today. And when my bill came up for public hearing, for 2 years, I was the only one I knew who could talk about this issue. And I really didn't honestly know all that much just 2 years into this. But now that I'm 12 years into this, 13 years into this, I can help everybody connect the dots very quickly through this presentation that we're giving. So I formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and I have found people all over the Commonwealth here who understand this, far too many who have been harmed by this, as our co-host tonight was injured by this technology. So we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and that's our logo behind me. The gentleman who created that beautiful logo for me is Chuck, and he lives one town over. He had something crazy going on with his leg where the nerves were going jiggity in his leg. And his doctor couldn't figure it out. So Chuck started doing his research and he figured out that, gosh, that's where he kept his cell phone all day long, was right on top of his thigh. And he was causing nerve damage from the radio frequency microwaves that are pulsated from all of our wireless tech. So Chuck figured it out and he stopped putting that device on his body. And lo and behold, the nerve damage that was accumulating in his leg actually healed. So this can rear its head in many different ways, and we'll go through a lot more of those symptoms today. But I built this website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. It's not scary, lots of white space and calming colors, because we don't want to freak people out. We just want to be able to have the facts so that based on those facts, we can do our own investigation. And then when we're at a comfort level, we can start making changes and protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and hopefully eventually our communities. So feel free to look at all the inroads we're making at the state level here. Feel free to look at all of our resources. And join us on my events page. You'll see that I do one of these free webinars every month, and you can always go to our events page to register. So then somebody down at our National Institutes of Health here in the United States found my work and asked me if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. And I was so honored. And I built out a panel. Dr. Deborah Davis was invited. She had a conflict that day, so she sent her executive director at the time, Theodora Scarato, who taught us what other countries are already doing, because we are way behind the 8 ball here in the United States, because this is where so many of the manufacturers are, and they have such power and strength in controlling the messaging that gets out to the public. So Theodora Scarato joined us to tell us about other countries that were already addressing this. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. When he retired, he learned about this and met with a dozen of the world's leading scientists and came back and said, here in North America, our Federal Communications Commission's public radiation guidelines here in the US are not safe. Canada's Safety Code 6 guidelines are not safe. So bless Frank Clegg. He has founded Canadians for Safe Technology, and he has been helping all over the world to get information credibly out there. So he joined our panel. We had Dr. Martin Pall, Pall, who's another one of the leading scientists. And it was funny because we only had like 8 or 10 minutes each to say our piece. So in that short amount of time, Dr. Pall whipped through these mechanisms of harm of what this is biologically doing to our systems. And we'll talk about that today in our program too. And then we also had Peter Sullivan join us. Now, I found Peter's work through a forum online that I had watched in the autism community. And Peter, in his younger days, had been a fighter pilot, kind of like Top Gun. So he was up with the Earth's really high natural electromagnetic fields out there in the stratosphere, inside of a military plane that has radar mounted all over it, sitting in a cockpit that has all the instrumentation panels inside the plane. So he was getting triple whammied with radiation, both natural and man-made. And this technology that we call wireless today came out of our military. It is radar. It's what they've been using since World War II to identify enemy warcraft and submarines and all that stuff. And then we brought it into the commercial sector with no safety training, no safety testing, and here we all have it all over us all day, every day. So when I listened to Peter speak, after he left the military, he was an engineer and he went to work for Silicon Valley. And it was like his friends who invented things like the cell phone. And like our co-host Daniel tonight, he's a techie and he loved all the gadgetry. So he had the best of everything. And he wound up getting very, very sick to the point that he started dropping unhealthy amounts of weight because his body couldn't keep up. His teeth started getting very brittle. And then when his sons each came up into the preschool years, they were both diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So Peter and his wife, who I think was a medical doctor, they did what a lot of families will do with somebody on the autism spectrum. They will clean out the diet and go to as organic as you can so you're not introducing chemicals from the environment into the body and the brain. They went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to pull those, heavy metals that store in the brain and other organs, to pull those out. And Peter will tell you today that the first line of defense that he recommends to families is do the digital detox. At least start with 12 hours a night with a sleep sanctuary so there's no man-made radiation in the environment. And he says that his two sons are now grown men. They've both gone through college. They're both contributing members of society. And neither one of his sons is on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was a possibility. But apparently there's something called de novo mutations that happen. And that means that it didn't come from mom's bloodline and it didn't come from dad's bloodline. The autism came from somewhere in the environment. So you clean up the environment and you may see incredible progress in a very short amount of time. And we don't want to overpromise because we recognize that every single one of us has a different body. And each of our body is composed of our genetics and our environment and, the other influences in our life. So we don't want to overpromise, but we do want to encourage that you take a very serious look at your wireless exposures and do everything in your power to start reducing them and see if symptoms that you or loved ones are experiencing may begin to turn around. So I like to share this link for our presentations at the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference because people will look at the National Institutes of Health and see a certain level of credibility with that. And our talks were held to 8 or 10 minutes, so they're very short, so they pack a hard punch very quickly. So please feel free to share any of these underlying links that we'll be sending you in my slides, hopefully tomorrow. Now, one of the biggest gaps that we had when I first fell down the rabbit hole is that we could tell that a lot of people were getting sick and they would go to their doctors and doctors would run the tests they know to run and then come up empty. And in worst case scenarios, they would infer that this is all in your head, that it's psychosomatic, rather than being an environmental assault that is biologically overpowering your own body's chemistry. So we're so grateful that we've had a couple of international EMF medical conferences. And I'll just run you through the alphabet soup a little bit. So we hear this talked about in terms of radio frequency radiation. It's also microwave radiation because it's in the microwave segment of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the spectrum of all these different wavelengths and how fast they come at you. So EMF can be electromagnetic fields, it can be radio frequency radiation, it can be microwave radiation, it can be microwave sickness, it can be electromagnetic radiation syndrome. But the bottom line is that we made this and we can fix ourselves given enough information and resources. So the last major medical conference happened right as the pandemic was starting to come on. And we were meant to be out in Scottsdale, Arizona for this conference with world leading scientists and doctors. And then the pandemic hit, and bless Elizabeth Kelly, who is the executive director. She pivoted and wound up being able to get funding to hire a professional team to pre-record all of our lectures. And then during the conference, we did the panels live to answer questions and to provide additional information. So this entire conference, now that the continuing medical education credit period has expired, Libby Kelly has taken the entire conference and we put it online at no cost. We can't get credits anymore, but anybody in the world can come learn from world leading doctors, scientists, building biologists, attorneys, and others. I was brought in on day 4 to speak about state and local policy. So it's an incredible resource, and we have all these amazing ways to get word out today. But there's no cavalry coming. It's up to you and I to learn, to get to a comfort level, and then start sharing the information that we've come to know. So that's my background and how I fell into this. So for this program today, we are going to take an overview of the tech impacts on childhood development, on what's becoming digital dependency or addiction, what radiation illnesses are, and then, most importantly, we're going to talk about solutions. How do we regain a healthier balance? Tech is here to stay. We live our lives by it. We couldn't be with you today without it. But there are very critically important facts that we need to know so we can make safer tech challenges or choices. And there's always hope, right? So don't give up. Let's just keep moving forward. And we'll teach you what to do with baby steps. And then we'll talk about a big, courageous first step. Why not do a tech Sabbath? Take one day a week for starters, where you're going to unplug, and we'll walk you through some great ideas for that. Okay, so what does a child truly need for proper development? I'll give you a hint. It's not in the shallows of a screen. Our children need to move. They need to be physically active to grow, to develop their brain, to explore their world. They need physical touch. We take in so much information through exploring our world through physical touch, not sitting swiping in the shallows of a screen. We need meaningful human connection with our families, our parents, our grandparents, our extended adult influences, trusted adults, and our peers. We need to be physically connected to other humans and nature. We are one of the little critters running around on this planet. We are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. We're meant to be out there getting sunshine on our eyes every day to regulate our circadian rhythm. So we are nature, and we need to remind ourselves of that and get back out in it. That is what a child truly needs for proper development. But here we are today with these excessive tech outcomes where we've got our pyramid really flipped around wrong. We spend so much time in front of screens with television, cell phones, the internet, our tablets, our wearables, gaming devices, and it's creating a lifestyle that is sedentary. Far too many people are isolated, they're neglected by those who are developing digital addictions, or they're neglecting those around them and getting overstimulated. Some people will lie down at night and try and go to sleep, and they're tired but wired, and they can't seem to get over the hump and get a good night's sleep anymore. So this is all leading to developmental delay, obesity, mental illnesses, detachment, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, increases in autism, and physiologically diabetes, stroke, heart attacks, addiction, violence, perversion with, all the sexual pornography addictions that are happening. People are getting over medicated. They can't control their impulses. We have a lot more illiteracy. And this is all leading to early death, the inability to form meaningful relationships, the inability to hold down a job. And this, my friends, is not sustainable. So what do we need to do? We need to flip it. We need to get back in touch with movement, touch, connect, nature. This helps to regulate our parasympathetic nervous system. It helps us to form proper tactile and attachment, modalities. And then it also helps with all these other development things. We become strong and coordinated, secure and regulated. We can be calm and focused instead of having the attention span of a gnat. And this leads to our ability to develop optimally, to be able to pay attention and to learn and to build a sustainable lifestyle. And I want to give a big thanks to our friend Chris Rowan up in Canada at Zone In Programs, where she's an occupational therapist, and she's built out programming so people can go get training with her organization too. So as we see, if we admit to ourselves, digital dependency is skyrocketing. We are overstimulating the pleasure centers of the brain. And we know from Confessions of Silicon Valley that they are developing apps to mindfully keep us addicted. The outcomes is we're having worse school performance, and it's harming our brain development. Communication skills. My daughter had a part-time job in high school working at a conference center, and she used to help with banquets and lifeguarding. And I was at a neighborhood holiday party one year, and the woman who runs that center just lives 2 doors down. And she came up to me, she goes, "Cece, I can't tell you how much I love working with your daughter. She looks you in the eye and she talks to you." And I'm over here going, "Is that so unusual?" And she goes, "You have no idea how many kids do not know how to properly communicate because they're not getting that experience. They are behind screens for hours upon hours every day. So we're impairing our communication skills. They're losing the ability for empathy. Little kid wipes out on the playground. They don't rush over and then say, "Oh my gosh, can I help you? Are you okay? Can I help you get to the nurse's office?" Doesn't even faze them. Creativity, problem-solving abilities. They're not developing the resiliency and the ability to think critically and solve problems. And again, attention span and self-control. So if you try to separate a child from a device and they lose their mind, you can bet that they are going down a pretty dark alleyway, and it's not going to get better without some meaningful interventions. And then, we used to teach handwriting in schools. That hand to brain activity is developing a lot of neurosynapses that we had bypassed when we got into the shallows of a screen to swipe or tap or a keyboard. So our motor skills are not developing the way that they should. And then we had this epidemic of obesity because people aren't getting out and moving. Such a high percentage of our kids today would not even qualify for military service if we needed them because they're not out climbing trees and running around the neighborhood and developing core strength. So we've got to do a U-turn and get ourselves and our children back on point again. And then one of my colleagues is a corneal surgeon down in Louisiana, and she was telling me that we now have an epidemic of myopia because as humans, as a species on this planet, we are meant to be scanning the horizon for predators all the time. That's what kept our eyeballs round. Now that we are in the shallows of these screens all the time, staring at close range, it's changing literally the shape of our eyeballs. So you see a lot more children and adults wearing glasses these days for corrective lenses because we're not doing as humans what we're meant to be doing on our planet. So last year, Dr. Jonathan Haidt out of New York University, he's a social psychologist, he published this book that got a lot of traction. It's called The Anxious Generation. And he identifies 4 foundational harms: social deprivation and spiritual degradation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction dependence. And this is all happening, and it started happening with our kids around 2012 to 2015 when we started handing them smartphones. And so the good thing about this book is it's really empowering parents and schools to start this conversation, to recognize that ed tech sold us a bill of goods, and we've got to get these devices out of our schools, starting with personal devices. So a lot of states even are passing legislation now to do bell-to-bell cell phone and personal device bans. And Dr. Haidt recommends no smartphones before high school because the brain is just far too vulnerable. No social media before 16 years old, and phone-free schools to free up the kids' attention for each other and their teachers. And now this is a big one. He wants to see more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Let these kids learn resiliency. Let them learn to problem solve. Let them learn conflict resolution without parents constantly hovering and showing them what to do. Let's let them develop their own smarts within reason. We need to keep them safe to an extent, but they need to be out there developing themselves, not just doing what a screen or an adult is telling them to do. So critically important that we get back to real parenting in our world today. Dr. Victoria Dunkley is another expert on this. She is a psychiatrist, and she has developed this incredible book called Reset Your Child's Brain. And she developed this 4-week plan to end these meltdowns, to raise the grades, to boost the social skills by getting rid of what she terms electronic screen time syndrome. And I will tell you this, one of my daughters, when she was in high school, she was, testing her boundaries, doing some of the things that kids will try out in high school. And I got on her cell phone one day when she left it out, and I started looking through and I saw what she was doing. And so I grounded her and I took her devices away for a week. And she's like, Mom, you can't do that. And I said, you keep that up, young lady. We're going to try 2 weeks. And so that kind of put her in her place. But I will tell you that after a week of my daughter being unplugged, we had our sweet, respectful girl back. And this is what Dr. Dunkley's plan basically does. The first week, the parents become educated on what this technology is doing to our kids. And they set up a plan that over the following 3 weeks, what are the kids going to be doing? Everybody in the family should be engaged, not everybody in their 4 corners sitting on their screens. Let's get back to real family dynamics, come up with things to do, allow time that is unstructured where kids can develop their own creativity and resilience. But at the end of that 4-week plan, we see these families so grateful and so pulled together again once they realize they can be in charge of technology, not the other way around. So it's an excellent book. And in fact, at our first medical conference, I was brought in for that one too, to speak on state and local affairs. And I had read her book cover to cover, and I had all these sticky notes on it, and I had a booth. And Dr. Dunkley came by my booth and she picked up my book, and she was just kind of tickled to see that somebody had not only read it, but had put all these markings in, because I wanted to tell different people about different things. So we have the tools today, everybody, but we have to find the courage to swim against mainstream messaging. So what does the American Academy of Pediatrics say about all this? Well, they've come up with a family media use plan, and they recommend no screen time before 2 years of age. And if you do it with your child. Sit the kid on your lap if you're going to Skype or Zoom with grandma across the country or something. Actively engage with your child, but do not just hand a child a device. Older children, no more than 1 to 2 hours per day. When I was raising my kids, who are now 26 and 30-year-old women, we always had a rule, no more than 2 hours of total screen time a day. And that's what's recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And here they have this family media use plan. So you can click on this and then sit down at the kitchen table with your family and talk about these issues together. What do they see in their world? What do they think would be a good idea? And then come up with a plan, create a contract that we're going to stick by. And here's the consequences if we break our rules, right? Let everybody have input so you have early buy-in. So lots of great tools for us. So that is all about the excessive screen time component of technology safety. Now we're going to transition and talk about the biological effects of today's wireless technology and what that's doing for our health. So we'll take a look at the legal fine print and we'll give you a demo of what this radiation looks like. We'll explain what these radio frequencies are compared to the Earth. And then we'll talk about the short-term and the long-term science. We'll, just kind of step back and go, well, where are all these signals coming from? We'll talk a little bit about how we've been kept in the dark on all of this. And then most importantly, what solutions exist right now to help us start taking steps towards safe technology use. When my bills were first introduced here in Massachusetts, it was that same summer that the Boston Parents paper came up with this 8-page article in here that was just phenomenal, with this little boy staring at his tablet, and the headline is "Wi-Fi in Schools Safe," in kind of school bus colors, a look at potential dangers. And this is Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist. She's retired now, but she saw huge connections between what happens to children and adults even with this wireless radiation exposure and what was happening in the autism community. So all these pieces of information have been around for a decade, but we don't hear about it enough, so we don't really empower ourselves to get out there and do something. So anybody who's with us, I invite you, if you have an iPhone, to take it out right now and go into settings. And if you use an Android or a Google phone or another platform, this information is in there somewhere. I just happen to know exactly where it is in the iPhone, and I'll give you a few terms to be able to find it in any device. So our friends at the Environmental Health Trust did a web page called See the Fine Print that will show us the fine print warnings that have been in there all along. The iPad, seizures, blackouts, eye strain, and nobody knows. And I know children who had their first seizures while using an iPad. So this isn't if it happens, it is happening. We just need to understand the symptoms so we can recognize that this could be a contributing factor. Okay, so from the iPhone, in settings, go down just a little ways and hit General. From General, go all the way down to the bottom and hit Legal and Regulatory. And then at the next screen, near the top, just 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. So Settings, General, Legal and Regulatory, and RF exposure. So anybody using a different kind of phone, you could just go do a search in your device for RF exposure and you'll find similar language. But what they tell us in this legal fine print is that we tested this device at a distance from the body. It's at the bottom of that first big paragraph. So if you're holding this device the way they give it to us, you are being radiated by multiple antennas in your device that exceed the Federal Communication Commission's guidelines here in the United States, or the ICNIRP guidelines that are used internationally. That's the International Commission on non-ionizing radiation protection. So the FCC and ICNIRP have been setting public radiation limits for decades based only on how much heat would it take to raise the temperature of your skin from a radiating device. Well, as we're going to see in the science, those government limits are set way up here, and the biological harm is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below what our governments are still condoning. So that first big paragraph says we tested this away from the body. And then another paragraph or two down, they say if you're concerned about this, to reduce your exposure, basically, once you know you're radiating yourself, don't touch it. They say to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. I'm going to take a pause on my screen share right now and show you a couple of things. So just know for everything that we have broken, we know how to fix. So as we're learning it, it kind of clicks in our brains like, wow, so those earbuds are probably a really bad idea. Yeah, because you're putting a microwave transmitter on either side of your brain. So for everything we've broken, there are some pretty good solutions out there. And what I'm going to show you right now is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And this is what it looks like. It's just rubber tips, right, that you'd hang over your ear. And the reason why the rubber tips are important is one of the properties with this man-made radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you've got metal earbuds going up to your brain, that's going to draw in all the ambient radiation and amplify and create more trauma to your poor brain. These little beads on here are called ferrite beads, and they break the radiation that comes up the wire. So it's got a big long wire on it, so you can set your radiating device far away and then only turn on the one antenna that you need for the shortest amount of time you can get away with. Because again, they give us these devices loaded and powered on with everything. So your one cell phone doesn't just have one antenna in it. It's got a cellular and a data antenna. It's got a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, a hotspot antenna. And for those who didn't know any better and upgraded to 5G, it's got a 5G antenna or an array of multiple antennas in there. So again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And we know what needs to be done. But again, no cavalry coming. So it's up to us to learn and pluck up the courage to do something about it. So when I was first discovering all of this, it's invisible. And I'm like, well, how do we even know that this is out there and that it's happening? So I discovered that there are radio frequency radiation detection devices, kind of like a Geiger counter for that does ionizing radiation, but this is non-ionizing, non-thermal, low-level man-made radiation that's pulsated out of all of our devices. At the EMF medical conference, this is the device that was recommended, and Daniel, our co-host, and I both have one of these. It's about a $400 device. But it will tell us if we're being exposed. In the scientific literature, they want us indoors, like in our sleeping spaces, to be no more than 10. And the unit of measurement of this maximum spike of radiation, the maximum they want us to be at indoors is 10 or less. So 10 microwatts per square meter or less. So basically, in 3 feet of air or a meter, how much radiation. So I'm going to turn my meter on and it powers up with red, yellow, green. But look at, I'm in the green. And I know you can't really see, but I'm going to read you that here in my house, the maximum is at 3. So I'm under that 10 threshold, and that makes me feel pretty good about protecting my family. But watch what happens. I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule, and I'm going to take it out of airplane mode, and those antennas will all come back online. And it's now in the flashing red, so it's at extreme levels of man-made radio frequency microwave radiation. Oh my goodness. I'm going back into airplane mode, and it will dissipate out of the air after a couple of seconds. So now I'm back down in the green, but it held the highest maximum that those pulsations just gave us. We went from 3 microwatts to 3,180,000 microwatts. 3 million, and we want to be at 10 or less. And I wasn't even doing anything. That was just the antennas coming online. And 3,180,000 is the top of this meter. So it may even be higher, but that's as high as this meter calculates. So yeah, it's bad. And when you think about our children in a classroom with 20 or 30 of their devices radiating, plus the wireless access points on the ceiling, plus everybody's personal devices, let alone the ones that are issued by the school, and all the metal, and it's bouncing off the metal and walloping us twice. We have created a really, really toxic environment. So let me go back to my screen share, and I'll share some encouragement for what we can do about this, right? So measuring is critically important. This is that meter that I just showed us. And then I went after a grant in my town, and I became the first in the United States to put one of these devices on loan in our public library. And now people all over are thinking, that's a pretty cool idea. We could just share it. Some people just pay the $400 outright. Others will pitch their pennies together and buy one and just share it among friends and loved ones and neighbors or colleagues. But libraries today are having to reinvent themselves. And so most libraries are starting a library of things collection. And my library had a kilowatt meter to measure how much electricity our light bulbs were using when the industry started pushing in these swirly CFL light bulbs, which, by the way, throw off a lot of bad energy. So that's where I got the idea to put a radio frequency meter on loan. And the Environmental Health Trust has a small grant fund right now. So if your library can't afford the full $400 on this in their budget, if a librarian contacts the Environmental Health Trust, I think through November, they are co-sponsoring grants to get these into our libraries. So feel free to look at their grant fund information there. But it's a great tool to have in the community if you can't afford to get one for yourself. So what is this wireless radiation and why should we care? What happened when we went from these safe landline telephone connections to all of this wireless tech? Well, when we stopped plugging in with wires, we started sending our signals through the air using two-way microwave radiation. And that, or these electromagnetic fields, the Earth has its own electromagnetic field. And there was a scientist named Schumann who figured out that 7.83 times a second, the Earth pulses this beautiful healing energy to everything that's meant to be connected to the Earth, including you and I, the birds, the bees, the trees, and every other biome out there. We get this beautiful energy that regulates our systems 7.83 times a second, or 7.83 hertz. That's the cycles per second. So what did we do when we started man-making all of this new energy out there? In the megahertz range, we are getting pulsated with microwaves 1 million times per second. And now with 5G, they're using these gigahertz bands. 1 billion times per second, we are getting jackhammered with man-made microwaves. And how they can fit 1 million or 1 billion into a second, that's way beyond my pay scale. But that's what we've done. And so it's no wonder that we have overpowered ourselves and every living thing on this planet. And we see species, not just a few pollinators disappearing. We are seeing entire species disappearing. And those are the little ones. They're going. And we are the bigger ones. And we are not a healthy species today. So Dr. Martin Blank from Columbia University, it was one of the leading scientists, may he rest in peace, but he wrote this incredible book called Overpowered, where he teaches the science on what all of this Wi-Fi era technology is doing to us. So excellent resources to learn. This is the electromagnetic spectrum, and it talks about how big are these wavelengths, how frequently do they come at us, and what falls into these categories. So here in the microwave category, we have moved into the cell towers, the utility smart meters, the microwave ovens, the baby monitors, the satellites, all of our Wi-Fi, all of our cell phones, all of that is operating off of microwaves. And we know that we would never leave ourselves exposed to ionizing radiation 24/7, the sun, X-rays, gamma rays, all of that. We should never be leaving ourselves exposed to these man-made microwaves either. So it's really throwing us out of sync with the natural world. Okay, so what does the science tell us? We're going to look first at the long-term effects. And 20 years ago, our own government was tasked by the Food and Drug Administration for the National Toxicology Program to do a study to prove that cell phones are safe. That was the technology of the day, cell phones. 2G, second generation, 3G, third generation. That was the tech of the day. And they went in it fully expecting to find that it's fine. Instead, after 20 years and an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they can assign. And that should have triggered public policy to protect us. Well, the industry gets a hold of these good studies and they go, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study. Well, right on the heels of our $30 million study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another multi-million-dollar study on cell tower base stations. And guess what they found? Cancerous tumors and DNA damage and more. So they went from the cell tower transmissions, we went from the device level, and we came up with the same thing. It doesn't matter where these transmissions are coming from, they're all biologically active and toxic. So just this April, the World Health Organization finally released a study that incorporates these studies, and they determine high certainty that cell phones cause cancer. And that's nearly a decade after these studies were out, because people in my world, at my schools, in my town, in my state are saying, well, we're waiting for higher authorities to tell us what to do. Now the WHO has come out and said this causes cancer. But there's captured agencies at every level, all the way up to the WHO. So we should have heard about this. We should have been, front page headlines all over the world, and nobody heard about it. So there's no cavalry coming. We've got to learn, and we've got to take charge of our own technology use. And DNA damage. So DNA is our roadmap to grow a proper anything, and it's changing the way things are formulating. When I first got started, I started reading the infertility studies and saw that they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. And it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. We just sent our youngest daughter off to college with her MacBook, and she was using it right on top of her reproductive organs. And our youngest daughter had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we gave her her first laptop. And she too was using it right on top of her reproductive organs. And so now we have additional studies, and these sperm studies have been repeated and repeated. We have a Kaiser Permanente study on women's vulnerabilities with this, showing higher miscarriage rates for women who are using wireless tech. So the science is solid. We don't need more science. We can always refine it, learn more, but we know enough to know we've got to protect our species and every other species out there. And then neurotoxicity. So even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety, depression. We're seeing suicidal ideation among children and adults like we've never seen before. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OB/GYN program at Yale Medical School. And Dr. Taylor did the rodent studies because it's unethical and illegal to do these on humans, although we're all kind of in the midst of this giant experiment with everything we're exposed to. But he did the rodent studies, and he found that after exposing pregnant mice for a certain number of hours a day, when the pups were born and got a little bit older, they started bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child with attention deficit order or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, just bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world. They can't focus. And as I mentioned, Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge connections between what we know happens with all these mounting environmental exposures till the brain gets to a tipping point and things don't come out the way that they used to. Alzheimer's used to be a disease that would hit people in their 80s or 90s. And with great thanks to Dr. Martin Pall, he has culled the science on this, and we're now seeing people in their 70s, their 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in rare cases, people in their 20s getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So we cannot continue to pollute the environment of the brain and expect that we're going to have the outcomes that we once had. So one of the big issues here is that mainstream media won't cover this with any depth because they have conflicts of interest with these industries that promote these toxic products. So we're always very grateful when well-known groups get funding to take on this issue. And one of those groups is the Environmental Working Group. And as a mom, I had learned about their fact sheet on pesticides in our food. And they every year come out with their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list on what foods you should try to get organically and which commercially grown ones you can probably get away with. So I already knew and trusted the Environmental Working Group, and now they've been able to put a PhD scientist on staff to take care of getting information and advocacy at the government level on wireless radiation. So know your audience. If you know others who have great respect for the Environmental Working Group, maybe you want to print out these fact sheets. Here's just a couple of the ones that they have. The effects of radio frequency radiation on the nervous system, and everything is well sourced with the science, easy to read. And here's another one that they have for protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. So we're very grateful. And, you know, children are not just little adults. Their very biology is still under construction. Their central nervous system is still forming. Their immune system is still forming. And we know this is a neurotoxin. We know it's an immunosuppressant. And with great thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues, they have modeled what happens when you put a cell phone up to the head on an adult. So these head models are turned sideways. The little yellow dot is the ear. When you and I put an active cell phone up to our brain, it's microwaving our brain about a third of the way through. On a 10-year-old child, it's microwaving about 3/4 of the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's microwaving almost the entire brain. So please do not give a child an active device. Because it's our job. We've got to protect our species, and it's where the children are and pregnant women. And anybody with an existing health condition is especially vulnerable. As we age, the elderly, their cognitive abilities begin to gradually decline, and this really does a number. So we need to be very careful of our vulnerable populations and us in general. So that's the long-term effects and what we know is happening in the science. In the short term, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for more than 20 years now, has recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, and they have guidelines for accommodations in the workplace. Don't put somebody right underneath one of these routers. Allow them to use hardwired technology. So things have been in place for a very long time, but we've never heard about it. The good news is that with a little bit of education, people pluck up the courage and go, well, gee, maybe I should create a sleep sanctuary and see what happens. And time again, people come back and they go, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it because I live my life on my devices. But by golly, I created the sleep sanctuary and I slept for the first time in years through the night. Or my children's behavior issues calm way down when we stop jackhammering ourselves with microwaves. So we now know scientifically a lot of these mechanisms. We know what's happening with infertility, with the cancers, and so forth. With the insomnia, what the science has taught us is that we are light beings, meaning that we operate off of our circadian rhythm. Each organ does its reset on this 24-hour clock, depending on light and dark. And so in the wee hours of darkness, in our sleep, the brain releases melatonin. And melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep and also helps to escort everyday cell repair toxins out of the body through the bloodstream. But what happens when we leave these invisible light pulsations from our man-made devices, when we leave those pulsations going all night, the brain thinks the lights are on. And it's over there going, when's it going to get dark so I can release melatonin? So once we start taking control of our environment and create a sleep sanctuary, a lot of people start sleeping again, including children and teenagers. When I was a kid, sleep is what kids did best. And now we have so many kids who don't sleep right. And we can step up and protect those kids. Headaches, nosebleeds, even ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. So here's another mechanism of harm. With great thanks to Dr. Magda Havas out of Trent University, she was one of the co-chairpersons of our EMF medical conference. She has done some of the studies where she literally looked at blood under a high-powered microscope, and our red blood cells should look like these nice, smooth, oval circles, free-floating and bringing oxygen up to all of our systems and organs. After just 10 minutes of exposing the blood to these microwaves, she looked under the microscope and documented that they were no longer these nice smooth shapes. They started looking like bottle caps. And then because it's an electromagnetic field, they started glomming together. And then this clump that looks, like this stack of coins can't get to where it needs to go to bring oxygen up to all of our systems and organs. So this oxidative stress is causing a lot of problems. Reactive oxygen species, our doctors will tell us, is the root cause of most chronic illnesses today. So if we're depriving our cells of oxygen because of this radiation, then that's a big thing we can fix pretty quickly here. And so that blood glomming together technically is called rouleau formation. And in my little brain, rouleau sounds an awful like a candy we have here called Rolos, which is that stack of chocolate caramels. So in my brain, that's how I remember rouleau formation. And then skin abnormalities. So everything out there, the birds and the bees, they have these systems built into their brains and their beaks, maybe with magnetite, to help them navigate in synchronicity with the Earth's electromagnetic field. That's their navigation system. Well, it turns out we have our own navigation system. We've got little antennas in the surface of our skin that tip us off if it's too cold out and we better go bundle up, or if it's too hot out, we better go before we get into heat exhaustion. So we all have these little systems built in with our own antennas. And when we overpower ourselves, we start having some pretty funky skin things that go on. Some people will talk about the hot ear when they put the cell phone up to their head. Other people talk about flushing and rashes and skin breakouts, like a burning sensation, because we're microwaving ourselves, right? And then we are electrical beings with our hospitals. If something's not working right in our brain or our heart, we'll go in for an EEG or an EKG or an echocardiogram. They're measuring the electrical pulsations in our organs. So they know how many pulsations they're supposed to be. And then when we have this man-made radiation pulsating at us all the time, for our heart, we might start having palpitations, arrhythmias. Some people will feel pressure on their chest. That it might feel like somebody's sitting on their chest and they can't quite catch their breath, difficulty breathing. Maybe their blood pressure is now going too high or too low, depending on their own biology. So it's doing a number on all of our organs, mood, anxiety, depression. We are jackhammering our central nervous system with microwaves. It also causes adrenal problems, digestive issues with the mast cells in our gut, weight loss or weight gain that can't be explained, hair loss, flu-like symptoms, and, as we looked at the long-term symptoms as well. So, cognitive impairment, it used to be as we age, we decline a little bit, but now we're seeing people way too young suffering from this. And one of the most heartbreaking things that I heard at the EMF medical conference was when the doctors were saying, look, if we don't get ahead of this, we are physiologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain where a person would make reasoned decisions. If we don't stop radiating ourselves, we can expect to see many more of these anger outbursts that we've seen in society with these mass shootings and other violence episodes. So it's happening. When we sent our kids off for the pandemic, we issued every child a wireless tablet to access their education with not one shred of safety instruction. So here these kids in many homes had unfettered access to these wireless devices 24/7 in many homes. And then when they came back from the pandemic, in 3 different school districts here in Boston, it was reported on the news that these kids were losing their composure, going into fits of rage, and literally beating on their classmates with the Chromebook. So it's not if this might happen, it is happening. We're just not hearing about it in mainstream media very often. So, and then again, the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation is up like we've never seen before. So we have the science, we have lots of resources at this link. And I was so honored that Daniel, who's our co-host tonight, he joined me along with 18 others last week for World Electromagnetic Radiation Syndrome Day. It was begun by a group in France, and now people all over the world are honoring June 16th as World Electrosensitivity Day. And we had a lot of people, including Daniel, come tell their stories. And we've been doing this here in the US for 3 years now. So we've got a whole collection of people's experiences and how this has really devastated their lives. And then we also talk about solutions and try to give hope. So feel free to watch that. So let's just become aware what is going on. The industry is forecasting that we will all have 200 plus devices wirelessly connected for 5G and the Internet of Things inside of our homes if we don't come to terms with this. All of our smartphones, all of these Bluetooth technologies, the Wi-Fi, the 3G, the 4G, the 5G, the routers, the cordless phones and headsets, the tablets, the laptops, the printers, the keyboard and the mice, all of these gaming devices. And please don't put a cell phone up to your forehead in a virtual reality simulation there. The baby monitors, babies that aren't sleeping anymore because we basically put a cell tower right next to their crib. Smart hearing aids are pulsating Bluetooth microwave radiation right at the brain. I did a presentation at a preschool last night, and one of the women who came wears hearing aids, and we tested how much radiation, and it was in the thousands. And again, that's right up on the brain. And when I said that this causes tinnitus or the ringing in the ear, she goes, oh my gosh, I used to stream content using my hearing aids, and I was getting this loud ringing in the ears. And once I stopped streaming content and I just started listening out loud, all the tinnitus in her head went away. She was one of the lucky ones. Some people never get rid of the tinnitus. And then all of our wearables, again, the message is not no technology. Let's learn to turn off every antenna except for the shortest amount of time and only that one antenna that we need at that time. Indoors, we're going to teach you how to hardwire. But at the community level, we've gotten so far ahead of ourselves with the technology without taking the health into consideration. All of our classrooms now have these wireless access points mounted on the ceiling. I interviewed a technologist from Ireland, and he said you could power an entire school with just 2 or 3 of these. But industry comes in and says, more is better. You need to have all these connections. So they've talked us into putting one of these powerful radiating devices on the ceiling in every classroom and every hallway. So the school is a complete red zone of microwave radiation. And that's not even at the device level. That's just the building. And then the macro cell towers are the big cell towers that started out in industrial parks, 300 feet up in the air, far away from where anybody was. And then they started encroaching closer and closer and set the laws such that so long as it doesn't really disrupt the physical appeal of things, then you can pretty much put these wherever you want. And now we see them sticking them on rooftops and church steeples, on school buildings, and they give a financial kickback. So our towns think it's a win-win, better service, and we get money for letting them put this stuff up. So those big cell towers are a big problem. They throw signal for miles, miles and miles, and everything in its path gets radiated. And then all that's left to monetize, the 3G and 4G and 2G use these big long waves that are able to get inside of our buildings to get to your devices. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And so they're spinning up 5G and the Internet of Things, super highways, smart cities, faster downloads for your devices. But in order to do that, they need to put 5G small cell towers everywhere because these little millimeter waves get disrupted by anything in the path, like trees or snow or rain will degrade the signal. So their solution is to put a cell tower literally at the curb outside at bedroom height every 2 to 12 houses. That's what 5G is. There's nothing small about the radiation. It includes the larger wavelengths plus this new layer of microwave radiation with millimeter waves. And then these utility smart meters at the medical conference, and we see it and hear it all the time. When these smart meters go in for electric, solar, gas, water, propane, these pulsations and microwaves go all day long, every few seconds, and a lot of people get really sick from those. We've got bills here in Massachusetts to give people the right to opt out of this toxic technology. Vermont has had a no-fee opt-out since 2012, and that was a backdoor deal done with one of the powerful senators whose nanny's husband got injured because he was one of the guys that used to have to go up on the rooftop for HVAC services where the cell towers had been mounted. So Vermont's had a no-fee opt-out for years, and every state should be protecting us and not these industry profits. And now we have all these satellites launching to beacon signal from up above. So we're getting it from all angles, but there are some important inroads happening. But I was over here scratching my head going, well, if this is bad as little me can just piece together and figure out by reading some science, why don't we know? Surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And you'll note that they put a revolving door on the cover of this report, and that's what's happened to federal agencies, national agencies all over the world, is industry has gotten in there and put their own people in power. And then they make laws that promote their profits instead of public safety. So I was so grateful to finally read this captured agency report, and a light went off in my head and went, oh, there is no cavalry coming. We've got to do this from the ground up. So here in Massachusetts, when we open this conversation, people are thinking tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. Nobody cares. It's just the not in my backyard, the NIMBY people. So every time a town wakes up to this, we put information up on our news page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology about things that are happening locally here. So you can say, look, I know it sounds like this comes out of left field, but look at all these other people who are already woken up to all of this. So you're welcome to peruse our news page. That $30 million study that we did here in the US should have triggered public policy, but the gentleman in charge of that study most recently went over to his colleagues at the FCC and said, we don't really believe that study. Why don't you just keep doing what you're doing? And one might ask, what would Dr. Jeffrey Shuren do that for? So we look at his background and we discover that Dr. Shuren was married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the telecom industry. Big Wi-Fi, big pharma, big agri, big tech. big food, all these environmental polluters. So we've had conflicts of interest at every level, including up to the World Health Organization. It took them 10 years to look at the science that was already done on this and determine high certainty that cell phones cause cancer. And they say cell phones, but it's every wireless transmission out there. But there's an organization at the World Health Organization that is funded by the industry. So we've got this industry capture at all levels, sadly. And these industries get in everywhere. We talked about the family medical plan with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and look here, look who's sponsoring that plan. So they don't come out and tell us about wireless. They just tell you that you should come up with a plan so people aren't on their devices too much. And they even got our Girl Scouts. Ericsson is one of the big telecom companies. They got in and created a curriculum so the little girls can earn a badge, getting all excited about 5G and the Internet of Things. And for the older girls who wear the sashes instead of the vest, they put a cell phone pocket right on there, right on top of the girls' breasts, reproductive organs. And we've all reached out to Girl Scouts of America to let them know this, and they should not be doing these programs. So that's all the bad news, you guys. Dr. Martin Luther King taught us that when important changes happen in our society, it comes through 3 areas, and there are incredible inroads happening in all 3 areas. The first is that the public gets taught what's going on, and that's what we hope to inspire with this free webinar that we do every single month. So you can always send people our way, because we know it's a lot to get our heads around, and it takes a while to be able to talk fluently about this. So don't feel that pressure on yourself. Send them our way. We'll provide the facts for them. And then once enough people are empowered with information and we start fixing things and we start speaking up, then we start seeing meaningful change from the grassroots up. In the courts, we're seeing really good inroads. And then the third area is public policy finally catches up and we get some protection. So for our personal selves, this is what safe technology looks like. On the back of your router, you'll find Ethernet ports. All you need to do is get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to where you use your technology. Then just buy an Ethernet switch so you can plug in your multiple devices. And then just buy little Ethernet cables to plug into each one of these jacks and get an adapter for each one of your devices. And so it's not rocket science to fix. For most people, it won't break the bank. So the first step is what we call hardwiring or cabling and just connecting back up so our signals run through wires. And not only is it safer, but you get a much faster signal. And your signal is far more reliable when you're running it through a cable instead of just buckshotting it out into the air to degrade as soon as you send that signal. So step 1 is hardwiring. Step 2 is you got to track down all those antennas and turn them off. And step 3 is you really need to measure, because with the Internet of Things, they're putting these antennas and multiple antennas in single devices in so many things that we would never suspect. So you really do need to do a scavenger hunt with a device like a radio frequency detection meter that we discussed earlier. So one of the nice things, one of the little tricks is in your settings in your phone, you can just forward your calls to a landline. Because remember, this is only meant to be mobile technology. When you're not on the go, use hardwired connections. And I know that many people in many towns got talked by the industry out of maintaining their landlines. Oh, let's just all do it through wireless. Isn't it so great? Well, no, it's not. So for probably around 20 US dollars, people can get their landline hooked back up. And that is a small price to pay compared to the medical bills that people are experiencing when they become electrically sensitive or develop cancers or infertility or any of these other man-made illnesses. So yeah, forward things to your cell phone. For navigating, if you're out going somewhere, what I do is I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. I might check it when I get to my destination to see if anybody was looking for me. But to navigate, I will come out of airplane mode for a moment. I will go into my map. I will get my navigation. And once it says go, I then go into airplane mode, and there's a satellite triangulation system that has locked in on my phone that's not using radio frequency radiation. And so it will just track me and navigate me to where I'm going in full airplane mode. Because again, metal amplifies radiation. So being in a car with wireless antennas, your head is the tallest beacon in that car. So that's really what's taken the brunt of this. So little hacks, baby steps we can all learn to use our tech safely. So in our schools, all those wireless access points have a fail-safe built in. They've got 2 Ethernet ports on the underbelly. All you've got to do is drop a cable, an Ethernet cable, down to task level at the desk and plug in the devices. Get these little adapters, plug it into an Ethernet cable. You know, you can get these Ethernet switches, which is like an extension box for electronics. This one is 5. That's the one I've got in my living room, but you can get one with 20 or 30 ports in it for a classroom. So this is totally doable. It's just the shift of the mindset because our schools have all been pushed into all of this wireless tech. So our friends, Patty and Doug Wood with Grassroots Environmental Education, they're an award-winning environmental group that have won, you know, an award from the Environmental Protection Agency for helping to get toxic chemicals out of the playing fields at schools. They've been working on environmental toxins for a long time, and they have built a project called Tech Safe Schools. And you can go right out there, and it has information on the health effects, information on the legal risks, because our schools could be held liable for radiating these kids and teachers, right? So we want our protections from legal assault as well as biological assault. And it tells us what to do. And most importantly, it gives the information for the tech teams so that the IT folks know what they can do today to reduce all this power level, because it comes out of the box, these systems, full tilt. And out in Silicon Valley, at Palo Alto School District, they discovered that they can take that power level down by more than 90% without losing any connectivity, but you've reduced the radiation significantly. They also had upgraded to a new system, but when they looked, they never turned off the old system. So they had the old system and the new system running concurrently, which is double the radiation. So there's all these little hacks that can be done at no charge as we make our way toward hardwiring for all of the technology that we can. So we know how to do it. Legal solutions, we've had lawsuits. The FCC's been sued. The courts found them guilty of ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. And the court sent it back to the FCC to account for vulnerabilities to children, to the elderly, to those with electromagnetic radiation syndrome, and anybody with an existing health condition. Because once your body's down a court, it doesn't have the energy to fight this off too. And then we get this whole cascade of further illnesses. So this lawsuit happened back in August of 2021, actually on Friday the 13th. And the courts told the FCC they've got to bring their public radiation exposure limits in line with the science, but they didn't give them a deadline, and nobody's held them accountable. So there are lawsuits that have happened all over the world. Here's some headlines from here in Massachusetts, and we invite you to look at that when you get the slides. And here is something that has happened for the first time in our country, for the first time at the federal level. They are recognizing that man-made radio frequency radiation emissions are one of the environmental toxins that we've got to get a hold of. So in President Trump's executive order for the Make America Healthy Again Commission, this man-made radiation and wireless is one of the areas that they're going to start going after. So we are very grateful for that. But again, public policy in the past has taken years. I don't know how swiftly they're going to be able to move on this time, but it at least gives us hope. But that doesn't mean we should wait around. I mentioned early on that we got a law passed in New Hampshire. You can look at their bill here, and this incredible commission report that asked very pointed questions. And why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and AM Best and others long since recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they put exclusions in their policies. So our towns aren't covered for damages. Why does the legal fine print that we looked at the beginning of our program even exist? Why is the FCC and ICNIR, why are they ignoring thousands of studies showing harm? And why are they only talking about the heat effects still, when we know that harm is happening at the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level microwave emissions? And why do we here in the US allow 100 times more radiation than other countries do? And why is nobody accounting for the cumulative effect of not just the tests that were done on one device, but all of this electropollution that we're immersed in today? So in 2019, in 7 months' time, we got that bill passed into law. They spent 1 year, even during the pandemic, investigating, talking to world-leading scientists, inviting the industry to the table to hear what they had to say. And they voted 10 to 13, they were 13 people on this commission. They voted 10-3 to adopt the recommendations in this commission report. And the 3 who didn't vote for it, 2 of them were from industry, and 1 was a senator that sided with industry. So this is our country's strongest document today, because they call out the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and our federal agencies, and they make 15 recommendations for what we should be doing to transition away from wireless for primary connectivity. And here in Massachusetts, we have a half a dozen bills currently this session. Others around the country also have other bills. And so you can go into these links and get access to that stuff too. So we have excellent solutions today to train our healthcare practitioners. I mentioned early on that anybody can access this EMF medical conference. You could slot a half hour into your calendar here, put an hour on your calendar to listen to this lecture or that lecture, but you will literally be trained by world-leading experts. Dr. Cindy Russell and Dr. Joel Moskowitz have established Physicians for Safe Technology, so this is a very credible place to open the conversation with your own medical team. And if you go to this link, you'll have a document that outlines every one of the lectures in the EMF medical conference. When I go to my medical appointments, my doctors, my dentists, my therapists, any of my healthcare practitioners, I will print this out and hand it to them and say, look, we've got a big public health crisis happening right now. And if you're not trained yet, here's how you can go do it. They may, like my doctor, she goes, well, it's everywhere. And I said, yes, it is, including in your office, when they handed me a tablet to sign in for my appointment. And then they brought a laptop in to take my vitals. I said, but those are choices that we make unwittingly, but we can fix that. So not an easy conversation to have, but we have so much powerful information. There is now the first medical school textbook has been published. So if you go here, you'll find lots of great resources. And then for the other professionals, the engineers, the physicists, the technologists, the architects, one of the outcomes of our Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health is they did a call for papers. And Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada pulled together scientists and doctors and building biologists and got a paper published to teach people what actually makes a smart and healthy building and what we need to do to mitigate the radiation exposure. So excellent resources here. And then in our schools, there's so many good things we can do today. I mentioned early on that Silicon Valley executives are having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. They know. They send their kids to schools like Waldorf, Montessori, and others that don't use technology in the curriculum. They've got the kids outside in nature and they learn the way little humans are supposed to be learning. Louisiana, with great thanks to Dr. Holly Gross, she got other doctors in different specialties. They unanimously passed this law to say we need to get a hold of some best practices for digital devices, because this strong push to put a device in everybody's hand for every subject is ruining our kids. So that was a great accomplishment. The Public Health Agency in Maryland became the first to do an investigation and report recommending that we hardwire our schools, and they came out with a fact sheet that we can all share. In the Netherlands, other countries, Finland, Sweden, and others are taking this technology out of the schools because the educational outcomes are going in the wrong direction. And so we see that these cell phones and personal devices are being banned by many around the world because of the distraction factor, the bullying, the social and emotional issues. And now it's time to introduce the radiation impact into the conversation, because you don't want to just take everybody's cell phones and hang them in a shoe rack at the back of the classroom radiating. That creates a huge hot spot and a very unsafe zone for all those students or teachers in that classroom. So I was asked, along with some others, to work with a parent advocate in the Los Angeles Unified School District out in California. It's one of the largest in our nation. And we came up with a very simple 2-page letter that congratulates the school district for starting a cell phone ban, and then says, now, once you get that done, the next step is to mitigate the radiation, and here's some information and resources to do that. So you can give that letter to your schools as well, and we'd be happy to work with you on that too. So also in our schools, our friends at Tech Safe Schools have this national program that teaches everybody what to do. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already worked with experts to develop kindergarten through grade 12 age-appropriate curriculum on prevention with Wi-Fi and cell phones. I was brought in with Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's a veterinary radiologist who got really sick when smart meters went in on her home, to the point where she was out in traffic with her daughter in the car, and she became so neurotoxic from the smart meters that she could no longer remember whether that green light meant stop or go. And she took a 50-50 chance and thank goodness made it home safely. But she and I were brought in to do professional development at her children's schools on their health and wellness day, and we did 4 sessions with teachers and administrators throughout the day. So we know how to get this information into our schools. And again, here's our little online course ready to go off the shelf that can be completed in about an hour online. And it allows you to print out a handy tip sheet at the end. And then for compliance at work or school, you get a certificate of completion with your little quiz score on it that shows that you passed this little course. So we have so many solutions. So what to do next? Let's keep learning together. I will commit to doing these free public education webinars every month. And you can always go to my website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and you'll find it on my events page. It's really good to get parents and other adults together and mature students and watch a couple of films. The Social Dilemma was done by the people who invented social media out in Silicon Valley to bring people together, and now it's being used for nefarious reasons. They're telling us, stop using social media. This is not what we intended. Stop using social media. I watched this with my daughter when she was in college, and she's like, wow, Mom, these guys from Silicon Valley are telling us to get off of it. And it made a really big impression on my daughter. And then there's a great companion film called Generation Zapped, and a little bit of my work with helping our schools become the first in the nation to take proactive measures to limit the radiation in our schools. It's featured in the film, but more importantly, doctors and scientists and other people, far too many, who have become sickened by this. It was included in the United Nations Association's Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the Women's Independent Film Festival, and it's picked up a lot of accolades. And it's now available through most of our library streaming services of Canopy and Hoopla, and it's also available in other major platform streaming services. So watch these films and get a good coalition of parents, grandparents, and citizens informed on this. And then as a group, talk to your towns, talk to your schools, because my hard lesson learned was I knew the facts, but I was just one voice. And as busy as everybody is, one voice is easily swept under the rug. about the only thing that has made meaningful change in our communities is when people learn together, come together, and then make the changes together and don't back down until you've got your children and your community protected. So I always hear the same comebacks from people. Oh, the industry says it's fine. Oh, the FCC says it's fine. Oh, with the inverse square law of physics, the further you get away from an agent, the safer it is. So I came up with this EMF points of confusion versus fact sheet, which is very quickly skimmable. And it gives you the actual facts behind all of this disinformation that industry has perpetuated. So people have come back and said, yeah, I love that thing. I print out copies of those and I keep them with me in my briefcase, in my glove box. And whenever I open this conversation with people, I just give them a copy of this and they're like, wow, we never knew. So lots of resources for you. So for today, what can we do? Let's aim for something that the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that's our CDC, when they talk about radiation, want us to get to as low as reasonably achievable. That's their ALARA principle, and it's got 3 stems. One is spend as little amount of time radiating yourself as you can. 2, create as much distance from something that's radiating as you can. But honestly, in the scientific literature, there's no safe level of man-made radiation. So distance helps, but you really need to remove the exposures. And if you can't remove them, then the third thing is to shield. And shielding is a delicate activity. You want to make sure that you know what you're doing. And I highly recommend that you work with a professional like a building biologist. Because if you don't and you do it wrong, it could backfire and you could wind up kind of double whammying yourself if it's hitting metal, or maybe you shield one wall of your home, but in the condo next to you, all of their signals coming through the wall and hitting your shielded wall and then bouncing back and hitting you again. So shielding needs to be done very delicately. But we can start looking around. Notice what our tech habits are and what is radiating. That's the first step. And then don't beat yourself up. Don't freak out on everybody around you because we didn't know. And we don't want to be like the newly baptized and be out there screaming and yelling, because if we do that, if we come off as crazy, that triggers the amygdala, an old dinosaur part of our brain that goes into self-protection mode. So if we freak people out, they can't hear the messaging. So we've got to learn to be very calm and focus on what we can do and start with these baby steps, right? Most important, create that sleep sanctuary. And our friends at the Building Biology Institute have a fact sheet on how to do that right here. That's what this link goes to. And then make your way into plugging in from your router with Ethernet cables and, the little splitter here that we call a switch. And then just get your adapters, plug everything in, turn off the antennas, and measure to make sure you got all the exposures. So as a rule, train yourself to keep airplane mode on. That disables the cellular and data antennas and maybe some of the others, but the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi sometimes will come back on their own by themselves. So you need to keep checking and make sure they say off. Because if they just say not connected, it means your device is still over there going, here I am, and pulsating that radiation. So these are baby steps that we can all consider starting with and starting to form new habits and do a mind shift, which is hard, but it's doable. And then maybe work your way up to a whole day, maybe a tech Sabbath. And our colleague, Marianne Tierney, is a career psych nurse. She's also a master of public health. She's been trained by the Building of Biology Institute and is now a building biologist. And she founded Safe Tech North Carolina. And she and I did a presentation one time, and I borrowed some of her information to do this tech Sabbath. So let's just sit down and talk about it with our loved ones, why we're doing what we're doing, brainstorm on what we can do to just have some really great quality time. Let everybody have a say in what we're going to do, hikes, games, crafts. Figure out what food you're going to have so you're not having to jump on your devices to order something or pull up a recipe. Do all your planning in advance, right? And then create a box, or a friend of mine has an empty paint can, which is a metal container. So once everybody puts their stuff in there, then the antennas can't get out if they forget to turn them off. They can't radiate outside of that once you put the lid on it. Let everybody around you know what you guys are up to. Make sure everyone's on the same page. Write down emergency contacts if you need to have them. Get directions in advance to where you're going if you're going out. And if you're going to go out to eat, look at the menus ahead of time before you start your Sabbath. And then get all your stuff together to do fun things, to go out, go to the library, take out books, go to the library of things, take out cool things. My library has a metal detector. Go down to the beach and play with the metal detector. My library has puzzles, they have games, all sorts of fun things. So prepare to unplug, get your food ready. And I love this quote from a CEO of a company called I Buy Direct. He said, you need to approach this as a blackout period with unwavering belief and commitment. The key is to be unapologetic rather than, oh, I aspire to do this, just do it. There's nothing, with the exception of a life and death situation, that would cause him to compromise this sacred Sabbath time. And he said, as far as his business is concerned, they can wait. So you need to commit and not cave in if you're really going to get serious about protecting yourself. So here's resources that we've talked about. My colleague, Dr. Carrie Crofton up in Canada, has published this wonderful book called Less Screen, More Green, and she's got digital tech plans in there, mindful tech plans. The Environmental Health Trust that we've mentioned a number of times, they've got all sorts of science in their website, but they've got a whole bunch of fact sheets and postcards and stuff that we can all use and print down. The Phone Free Schools movement and Screen Strong. These are parents whose children have been harmed from excessive screen time. It's great to support their efforts too. I've been having, backroom conversations with them about inviting the wireless radiation into the equation, not just the excessive screen time. And then here's the Building Biology Institute if you want to hire or just go look at their fact sheets. Less EMF is one of the trusted companies. They've got great customer support. If you want to get something like the hollow tube or air tube headset, and then our friends at Safe Living Technologies are the ones who have the radio frequency detection meters. I bought my shielded bed canopy from them. So I don't get kickbacks on any of this. I'm just sharing with you the resources that I've figured out for myself. So thank you, everybody. As Dr. Lynn Patrick said at the first medical conference, we know coming into this knowledge is like drinking water out of a fire hose, and it's really overwhelming. We know that. When I was raising my kids, if something had them upset, I would say, go scream into the couch cushion, get it out of your body. Like, birds and dogs will shake after a conflict and get it out of their body. We need to do the same thing. So I tell my kids, go scream into a pillow, come back to the kitchen table, and we'll sit down and we'll figure out what we can do. So here's resources to keep learning along with us. If you want to reach out to Daniel and maybe talk to him about symptoms you may be experiencing, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk you through what his experience has been. And then he's got solutions on his webpage too there. Our website at Mass for Safe Tech, we've got lots of great things. So Tech Safe Schools, this pilot program that I'm doing with 10 champions around North America, we have set up a Facebook page so that after we educate those around us, when we're ready to go to the schools, they can come here for resources too. And it always helps to see if people are liking it or following it. So if you are on Facebook, if you could please like this. I hate that part. I really hate social media, but we have to meet people where they are. So if you're out there, if you would like our page, we'd be grateful. And then we've got our Safer Screen Time course for anybody that can be completed less than an hour online to really reinforce all of this and train groups of people at once. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing and we will bring Daniel back in as our co-host to ask if there have been questions in the chat or any additional information that we might share with people now?
Yeah, there was a quick question about an iPhone adapter not working while it was connected to Netgear. I think we did touch on that, that it might be that it's the adapter itself, because it's always a little bit of a tricky thing that some adapters work well with one phone and not with another. My personal experience is I've got a box with probably 10 adapters for somebody with Linux or with a Windows computer or with a Mac computer. You never really can tell. It's a bit of a
Yeah.
systematic process.
Right. We suggest that before you buy something, check to see if it can be returned. That way you're not stuck with something that you paid for and you can't use, or maybe you pass it along to a friend or a loved one who has the right system to connect with. So do your research in advance and see which device is going to work with your own stuff. So thank you. Any other
Um,
questions?
yeah, Ellen was asking what distance do they use for testing? I think that was in relationship to how far do you keep the phone.
Yeah, so it's just like 5 millimeters, and they put a spacer in there so that they're not actually testing it right up against your head like we use it. And the worst part is they only tested based on thermal effects. They didn't test on biological effects. So even if you met that 5 millimeter thing, there's no way you're safe because you're still radiating yourself. So that was a great question, Ellen. Thank you.
Yeah, that Ellen also said that she never saw those earbuds, so she's looking forward to buying them. I think you've got a link in there
Yeah,
for
if you
that.
go to Less EMF, I think that's where I bought mine from. Um,
And the last question I think is quite prudent. That was in regard to the Safe and Sound Pro. Do less expensive devices do the same?
yeah, so I like the Safe and Sound Pro 2 for my teaching because it tells me exactly what the maximum readout is. But there's like a little baby sister one called the Safe and Sound Pro Classic, I think, and it's about half the cost. And it's smaller. It's like the size of a deck of cards, so you can keep it in your pocket. And it's about $200, and it's got the LED, green, yellow, red. So for some people, that's sufficient. There's also another one out there called the Cornet meter that some people like. And there's also a tri-field meter, which will measure not only the radio frequency, but also dirty electricity and electric fields and magnetic fields. So yeah, there are different ones out there at different price points. And of course, depending on what you pay, it kind of reflects the quality as well. I would strongly urge people not to get a $100 device. One of the libraries here in Massachusetts bought some GQ I-90 or something. And when we put it against the one that we have at my library, which was a $400 device, that little one was missing some of the frequencies that the better devices get. So depends on what your needs are. If you know you're electrically sensitive, you're going to want to see if you can get a hold of a device that's really going to account for what you need to prepare yourself for. So,
Good
yeah.
to
Do you
know.
Yeah,
have
Thank you.
thoughts on
I had
that?
that with the Cornet that was my first meter, and it showed that there was nothing there and it seemed all safe, but yet I was still getting my headaches. And it was only then when I upgraded to the Safe and Sound Pro that it was clear, oh no, there are signals here. That is why I'm getting my headaches. So you get a false sense of safety if you've got something that's maybe cheaper. Probably
Right.
if you're really sensitized already, would pay to go for the
Yeah. And
better
Daniel, when you
device.
talk about that false sense of security, people will ask because they hear about products that will protect them, like pendants and stickers and crystals and harmonizers. Um, and for me, the best advice that I can give is to mitigate what you can, because there's no safe level and you don't want to give your body a sense of security. And then maybe over time you wind up with cancer or infertility because we can't feel those, right? So what's been your experience with gadgetry?
Yeah, no, I was very open-minded always in the beginning, and I didn't want to dismiss stuff that I didn't even when I really realized that it didn't work for me, I thought, well, maybe it works for somebody else. But I've gotten a bit more on the hard side with it. I agree with like somebody like Keith Cutter.
Mhm.
There's no there's no positive effect coming from it. Maybe it helps people to calm down their limbic system. Maybe it
Mhm.
does bring down their stress levels, and therefore it has a good effect.
Mhm.
But once you get to a certain point where your body is actually starting to falter, yeah, it's exactly what you say. It's distance, it's shutting it off, and
Yeah.
as a last resort, shielding.
Yeah.
Those are the
And
things that I found that work.
right.
Yeah.
And another thing that I recommend people do is muscle testing because our body has a higher knowledge and it will tell us if something is going to be beneficial or detrimental. And I was with might have been an acupuncturist or a chiropractor, one of the
Mm,
energy healers. And they said they have muscle tested so many people, like with their cell phone and without their cell phone. Every time that cell phone, whoomp, they
yeah.
cannot hold their energy when exposed to this. So muscle testing might give you the answer to, and the crystals and stuff too. Again, like you say, if it helps to strengthen one person's biosphere, it might short out the next person. So everything is very individual with our bodies. So create as much distance as you can, remove as much exposure as you can, and shield if you can't. Those are really the three things that work. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Were there any other questions?
No, that was it. That's good.
Okay.
You've got a
Anybody
very
who's with
comprehensive
us is
talk. So,
welcome to unmute. Ellen, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
oh,
I just want to say that after last night's talk, I've been much more careful with my cell phone use, and it's in airplane mode most of the time now. So I thank
Bless
you
you,
for
Ellen. So
that.
Ellen is a friend, and we did a presentation last night at a nursery school, and Ellen came with us. And, she's heard me talk at some of our women's group forums, and she picked up some tips last night, and she picked up some more. So we do this free public education webinar every month, and people do come back time and again to learn a little bit more and a little bit more and find the courage to do something more. So thank you to Daniel. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Thank you to everybody who will be
You.
receiving this by email. And we wish you a tech safe day. And Daniel, thank you for sharing all of your hard-won expertise. And I'm just thrilled to know that you are sitting in a safe environment.
thank you so much. Great talk.
All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.